Shalom. My name is Yair Davidiy. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am Hebrew Nations, an organisation that researches the whereabouts of the lost 10 tribes, and we have found them amongst Western nations. And we identify the Western nations as being descendants of the lost 10 tribes, meaning that that is where the lost 10 tribes are to be found. Not that every person in the West is descended from Israelite tribes, but that is where the lost 10 tribes were to be. That amongst those peoples in the West is where the lost 10 tribes are to be found, and we have proven it. And that is what we do. We prove the case. We bring knowledge of it to as many people as possible, as many as we can, and we work towards spreading this information and also towards bringing about a reconciliation between Judah, that is the Jewish people, and the lost 10 tribes of Israel, that is the peoples in the West. And we find that in addition to being able to locate where the lost 10 tribes are, we are also have been enabled, or we are merited, to identify specific areas pertaining to definite tribes, to specific tribes, expressed tribes, certain Israelite tribes settled in concentrated areas amongst Western nations. And we have identified the tribes of Joseph, that is Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh as the so-called English-speaking peoples, the so-called Anglo-Saxon nations, and we identify these peoples as descendants of Joseph, of Ephraim and Manasseh. In addition to this, we find the term Ephraim being used as a generic term. Sometimes in the Bible it is applied to all of the 10 tribes, because Ephraim was the leading tribe, and also because Ephraim was to spread the specific blessings that he received to all of the others, and also because the first king, Jeroboam, came from Ephraim. Whatever the case, this is a term that the prophets used for all of the tribes, or sometimes according to the context. We can only, according to the context, can we tell it applies to the specific tribe of Ephraim, or it applies to the tribes of Joseph as a whole. And we identify the tribes of Joseph as English-speaking peoples, and that is the peoples of Britain, the British Isles, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Ulster, and the offshoots of Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, and also the USA. And these nations are otherwise known as the Anglo-Saxons. That is what they are called. That is what they are called according to in the media. That the common day usage of the term Anglo-Saxon is applied to these peoples. You may go to a dictionary and you'll find different definitions of the term Anglo-Saxon. Some will say it applies to the nations that came from Germany, even though they were not Germans, but they came from that region and they conquered England. And there are different definitions given to it, but the term as it is used in common everyday usage, colloquially, as one would say, is how we apply it. It is how it is applied to peoples, mainly white peoples, who speak the English language and who have some type of cultural affiliation to the British, or to British cultural concepts, one could say. And this also applies to the USA, and it applies to the nations of Britain and their offshoots. And these nations are otherwise known as Anglo-Saxons, or in our terminology as Ephraim in the Bible. And we're going to show something which is very surprising and very important, because the very term Aegel, as an Anglo-Saxon, Aegel also in Hebrew means bull calf. We will show that it means bull calf, even though the usual term is pronounced as Aegel. In modern Hebrew, Aegel is how the term for bull calf is pronounced. We will show that it could also have been pronounced as Aegel, and this was a name applied to Ephraim according to the Bible, according to biblical commentators, especially Rashi. And this is what we're going to show, and we place an emphasis on names in our studies, because we believe in divine providence, and God Almighty has left the names of or has caused through history that the names of specific tribes should somehow or other appear in the national appellations that they are recognised by. In other words, by the very name of different peoples or different groups within the peoples or nicknames given to the peoples, we may make tribal definition, tribal identifications of them. And this is what we will show. And we have the name Anglo and Aegel. So we have these names Anglo and Aegel. Aegel in Hebrew means bull calf. Aegel in Hebrew means bull calf. Aegel was a name applied to Ephraim. Aegel would be pronounced something like Aegel or Angle. Angle was how it was probably may have been pronounced or could have been pronounced in specific Hebraic dialects. But also, not only that, we find amongst the Anglo-Saxons, because the Anglo-Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes invaded Britain together with other tribes, and eventually the Angles gave their name to England. Angleland, Engleland, and from that we have the term Anglo in Anglo-Saxon, and they gave their name to it. But also on the continent, before or as they were crossing over, we have records, and we find that the Angles were also known as Aegels, also known as Aegels. Angles and Angle and Aegel were interchangeable terms. There's sometimes been stated, for instance, if Claiborne in his edition of Beowulf, page XLII, that is 42 in Latin letters, he says that Aegel was a diminutive, in other words, a nickname for an angle. But this is just supposition, because in Hebrew the two terms are different ways of pronouncing the same word, and this could have also stayed with them then, and that is why we have these two names applied to the one entity. And so this is one point that we have. And we also find amongst the Jews that in the word Aegel in Hebrew can be pronounced as angle. The first letter of the word Aegel is an ayin. An ayin in certain dialects or different ways of pronouncing Hebrew can be pronounced as an an. For instance, we have Ayin Yaakov, or the Eye of Yaakov, the Well of Yaakov is a famous book. Is popularly known as Ayin Yankov, with the Ayin Yankov, with the Ayin sound in Yaakov becomes An. Ayin Yankov. Yankov. So too we have the name Yank. The name Yank is applied to an American. Within America, it is the word Yank or Yankee is applied to someone from the north, from the northern states. In the American Civil War, the northern states, the Yankees fought against the Confederates. But outside of the USA, the term Yank is applied to an American in general. It is a generic nickname for any American from the USA. And Yank, there's all kinds of explanations as to where this word Yank came from. Some say it comes from a Dutch word, others say it comes from a Red Indian word. But it is also in Hebrew, in Yiddish and in European Hebrew, could be pronounced as Yank. It's the same as Jack or Jake, short for Jacob. It is another way of saying Jacob. And so too, we find amongst the Sephardim, before the Second World War, Sephardic communities, that is, not Ashkenazi communities, but Jews from the Mediterranean lands and also from the East, they also previously amongst most of their communities, a good portion of their communities, they also pronounce the ayin as an an sound. They pronounce it the same as the Ashkenazim, and so therefore an Aegel would also be known as an angle, and there amongst them. And this is apparently how it was pronounced or known in biblical times. We have works by Aaron de Leon Leone. For instance, the pronunciation of the consonant iron. He wrote an article on this, and he is apparently a specialist in this field. And look his name up, Aaron de Leon Leone. He wrote at least 2 articles on this subject, showing that the iron was pronounced as an eng sound. So therefore, the Aegel, or the Aegel in the iron in Aegel could have been pronounced as angle. So for angle is another way of saying Aegel, and angle in Hebrew means bull calf. Bull calf was another name of Ephraim. And how do we know this? So we can find it by looking up the Jeremiah 31. It says, indeed, it's beginning from verse 18. Indeed, I heard Ephraim pleading, you disciplined me, and I took the discipline. I was like a bull calf. In Hebrew, an Aegel, an untrained bull calf. Bring me back, let me come back, for you are the Lord my God. I was like a bull calf, an Aegel. Here, Ephraim is pleading, and he's comparing himself to a bull calf. And so too we have this name Aegel, this term Aegel in Isaiah 27 verse 10, for the fortified city is solitary, habitation deserted and forsaken like the wilderness. There does the bull calf and Hebrew Aegel graze. There lie down and devour all its branches. Now Rashi Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, in the Middle Ages, he explained this to be referring to Ephraim. He says that Aegel means that Ephraim will inherit these lands, for he is called an Aegel, a bull calf, as it says, like an untrained bull calf in Jeremiah 31:18. That's a Rashi quoting from Jeremiah 31:18, but on Isaiah 27:10 compares or says that bull calf Aegel is another term for Ephraim. So there we have it. Incidentally, he also interprets Isaiah chapter 27 as describing a future war between Ephraim and Ishmael, and how Ephraim shall defeat Ishmael. And Ishmael represents the Arabs and the powers of Islam in general. In the future there will be wars between them, and there will be ups and downs in these wars, but eventually Ephraim shall prevail. And Rashi so explains Isaiah chapter 27 in this way. So there we have it. We have this word Aegel, and this word Aegel, pronounceable as angle, and this is where we get the name Angle from, and England and Anglo-Saxon. An Anglo-Saxon is a term applied to a group of nations whom we identify as indeed descended from Ephraim, or within whom the tribe of Ephraim prevails and expresses himself. And this is how we, in the very name, we find this represented and given expression unto. We also have a source that says that amongst the Saxons who invaded England, now the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes and the Vandals and other peoples, they invaded England and they conquered it. But those Saxons who came along with the Angles, they were different from the continental Saxons. Also Saxons further to this, known as another people further to this, known by the same name, Classical Saxons of Germany. But these Classical Saxons, they didn't have kings, and they were different. They were different from the Angles and the Saxons who invaded England. The Saxons who invaded England were seafaring people, a pirate people. They had kings, and they were different in their customs and in many different and other ways from the Saxons who remained behind. even though amongst the Saxons that remain behind there may also have been Israelites, because we hold that amongst the Germans who came in the 1700s and 1800s to the USA, where there were many Hebrews, there were many Israelites, that Israelites did remain in the continent to a certain degree, but all of them migrated in the great migrations to the USA and to other Israelite nations, and they separated out from the rest who's remained in their areas, when sometimes you had one village, two villages one beside each other, and there were examples of whole villages getting up and transferring themselves as if driven by an unseen hand pushing them, whereas their neighbours remained. And similar things happened all over Europe, and we understand this to have indicated the separation of Israelites from non-Israelites in these nations. At all events, we have seen that Angel and Aegel are one and the same words. They both mean bull calf. His name was applied to Ephraim. It refers to Ephraim in the Bible, and it also has given rise to our expression England and Anglo-Saxon. And Anglo-Saxon are the peoples where we find Ephraim giving expression to who he was as the Bible predicted. May the God of Israel bless all of you. Thank you.